People who live rurally. What's the scariest experience you've had that you can't explain? Part 2. Please remember to like, share, and subscribe. I live alone in the woods, 15 minutes from my town. My neighbors are near, but not right next door. One summer morning, I woke up around 4:30 a.m. to strange pounding sound. It was still kind of dusky, dawn lighting, and I was in a daze from just waking up. Then I started to hear a man's voice yelling, "Somebody help me!" I began to look out my windows to see if I could see anyone, but couldn't from upstairs. My home has no window covering on any windows. I went downstairs and caught a glimpse of him, naked with a thin t-shirt on, running around my house trying to jiggle windows and doors. He was very erratic, kept screaming for someone to help him, and kept running from door to window all around trying to find a way in. In any normal situation, I would gladly help someone in need, but this situation felt too unpredictable and dangerous for me to allow this person into my home. I was able to contact my neighbors, who got my message and quickly made their way over to help me. This is faster than any police that can get there. The guy ran away, straight into the trees before they arrived. He was picked up by RCMP shortly after. No idea what happened there. My dad used to rent this house way out in the middle of nowhere, a good 45 minutes from any town. The closest neighbor was another 15 minutes away. On the property were several enclosures for raising pheasants. These belonged to the property owner, so my dad had no responsibility towards them, other than to notify the owner if he saw something wrong. He was high school buddies with the owner, so they were on good terms. Well, one morning he notices something very wrong. In the pheasant enclosure furthest from the house, with a good 50 or so birds. Every single one of them had been slaughtered overnight. What was even weirder was that it didn't seem to be an act of predation. None of the birds seemed to have been consumed. Luckily, the owner had cameras and they got to see what really happened. So, sometime in the middle of the night, a man neither of them recognized had wandered onto the property. He made no attempt to approach the house, but instead crawled under the enclosure's fence and proceeded to catch and stab each pheasant with a knife while wearing a headlamp. They caught the entire event on camera, from him entering the property till he left early in the morning. The police were called, but nothing ever came of it. My dad was so freaked out from the whole event that he made us stay with our mom for several weeks while he slept in bed with a gun. The property owner tightened up security with new fences and alarms. He even bought some guard dogs. They were very well trained and super friendly to anyone who'd approach them during the day. Nothing ever happened again on that farm, and the bird-killing psycho was never found. I walked about a mile from home to go mushroom hunting in a usual area. Walked through a field of goldenrod as high as my shoulders and was about to enter the woods when I felt something strange. I felt like I needed to go or I wouldn't get out of there alive. I didn't hear or see anything, but I'd gotten goosebumps and I felt anxious when everything was fine before I reached that spot. I stood there debating and decided to go hunt somewhere else. I've gone back many times and haven't experienced that again. I live in an area that has bears, wolves, coyotes, and bobcats. I've never had any problems with them on walks or hikes in the woods, but maybe that day would have been different, or maybe there was a bad person in there. I've learned to trust this feeling I get. It saved me many times, and when I ignored it, I got hurt. Whatever was in there, I did the right thing in not going in. When I was a teenager, I went to visit my aunt and cousins who lived in the boonies in a town named Eager, Arizona, close to the border of New Mexico and half a mile away from the town where Fire in the Sky took place. I was really into alien abduction lore. I suffered from sleep paralysis, where I'd wake up but couldn't open my eyes or move my body. Anyway, late at night after everyone went to bed, I put on a movie. I can't remember the name of it, but it was like the Blair Witch version of an alien abduction movie. I was really into it and totally geeked out. All the lights in the house were off, just the TV screen. I heard something behind me and slowly turned around in my reclining chair, only to see a goddamn alien staring at me. I freaked out and jumped straight into the air screaming. Guys, it was a half-inflated balloon left over from my cousin's birthday party. My wife and I were staying at a cabin in a rural town in the mountains. Around 8 p.m., an air raid siren, fire maybe, rang out for quite a while. We joked that it might be a zombie apocalypse, and after a while, we actually got a little nervous that we didn't know what it was for. So I put on my coat and pots and walked down the road to a small grocery store nearby. Went in, asked if they knew what that siren was for. They said, "What siren?" And when I went back outside, the siren was gone. One Friday this summer, one of my neighbors who has no kids claimed her storm door. She had no visitors that day. When she woke up the next morning, there were what looked like 10 or 15 children-sized handprints on her storm door. She called the cops just in case there was a missing child or something, and they came out to take a look. Said it could have been raccoons, probably was, but for a while there I was genuinely freaked out. Summer 2020, I made the mistake of going out onto the porch at around 11 p.m. I was about to take the trash out of the dumpster across my backyard, but I felt something in the yard and froze. A few seconds later, I heard footsteps and something moved around out there. It was not a person. I left the trash on the screened-in porch and locked the door behind me so fast. I don't go outside after dark now if I can help it. We've recently had reports of black bears in the area, so that might have been it, but I don't know. I've never seen one here in person. I used to own 5 acres of land with a cow field as my only neighbors on all sides. I've always sang these really silly songs to my pups. One of is the nursery rhyme Daisy Daisy. I sing the songs inside my house mostly because my dogs are indoor dogs. Anyway, one crisp fall evening, I was inside my house alone with my windows open. I heard a faint, low whistle. It was the Daisy Daisy tune, whistled slowly and deliberately. At the end of the verse, the whistling stopped. I was too scared to look outside. I'll never know what caused that noise. I lived in the country for a few years, and for the most part it was amazing. There weren't many times that odd things happened that I couldn't find a rational cause for. But the one time I can recall, it was nighttime. My mom and stepdad were out, and my grandma, who lived with us, was sitting in the living room waiting for them to come home. We had the TV off, and my brother wasn't home, so it was just us. There had been some fireworks lit off from a farm up the road, so it wasn't really a quiet night. But just after the fireworks died down, I heard something clinking against the gutter drain at the front corner of the house. This was followed by light tapping against the living room's exterior wall. My grandmother was a nervous sort to begin with, and she was trying to ignore the sound, but because there had been some vandalism at another house in the area, I peered out the window into the dark to try to see if there was anything I could make out. Of course, it was nothing but blackness. I decided to grab my stepdad's pistol and just make sure everything was kosher. I opened the front door and went out onto the steps so that I had a clear line of sight that way, and then stood there quietly listening for any sounds of movement. I heard nothing out of the ordinary, so I went back inside. I told Grandma it must have been an animal and put the gun back. After she went to her room, the tapping started again. I listened a few moments and then grabbed the pistol again, and this time was smart enough to grab a flashlight. As I was making my way to the door, the tapping became thumping and moved up the wall onto the roof. Now, I've seen raccoons climb up walls and whatnot. This wasn't that sort of noise. These were heavier and more coordinated. As the thumping moved across the roof to the back side of the house, I turned, decided to relatch the door lock, and I just undone, go down to my room in the basement. I went outside the following morning and didn't really find much. There were some spots near the drain where the dirt was disturbed and a mark on the wall that looked like something had hit it, but I saw nothing that could point to a culprit, man, animal, or other, and it never happened again. I live in a city now, but when I was a kid I lived with my grandma in a very rural area of Florida that was known for being a dumping ground for murder victims. I never actually found a body whilst playing in the woods, but I did find a woman leaning over a creek in a dirty white dress at around 6 p.m. right as the sun was setting. I heard her faint sobbing in the distance and went to investigate. When I climbed over the embankment at the edge of the creek and finally saw her, she almost immediately started screaming at the top of her lungs, just staring into the water. Obviously, I wasn't a scaredy cat. I was a brave 12-year-old. So, naturally, I instantly shit my pants and ran away. Still have no idea what that woman was doing, but that area was also known for having meth labs hidden in the woods, so that probably explains some of the strange people I met playing in that area. I was a live-in caretaker for a 94-year-old woman with Alzheimer's for about a year and a half. She had moved into her daughter's home deep in the woods in the middle of nowhere, Washington. Marie was prone to say weird things, like that her sister deceased, mother deceased, and husband deceased were in the house or outside regularly. I had been working with dementia patients for a few years by this point, so it never bothered me. Marie was terrified of the woods. She would tell me about how there's dangerous animals out there, and I could get lost easily, so I must always stay inside. She was also worried about her mother and husband having to travel through them. Again, this wasn't worrisome behavior given her health condition. I'd been working with her for about 6 or 7 months when I would start waking up to her walking down the halls in the middle of the night. Sundowning is fairly normal for people with Alzheimer's, so again, I wasn't troubled by this. But she started going to a specific window and giggling, like she was interacting with someone outside the window. When asked what she was doing, she'd say, "My mother is out there. Kinda weird, but there's a different perception in her world now." One night, in the dead of winter, her daughter and I were awoken to the blaring of the house's alarm system. The daughter and I checked the doors and windows, none of which seemed to be disturbed or unlocked. The only thing missing is Marie. She's nowhere in the house. Panicked, I rush outside to find her while the daughter continues to search the house. No tracks anywhere, no disturbed snow, nothing. After 10 to 15 minutes of yelling and searching the woods, I start making my way back to the house where her daughter was already in the process of calling 911. As I reapproach the house, I see Marie, standing outside the window she normally stood at, giggling. There's not a single footstep in the snow around her, nor is she cold to the touch. She's just standing there laughing at nothing. Didn't even know she was outside. Her late-night window visits became more frequent after this, but less happy. She'd get combative with the window and scream at whoever she believed to be there. Then it just stopped one day. One of the last conversations I had with Marie before she passed, she told me to not let them take me into the woods. I hope they didn't. I don't live in a rural setting, but I work quite a bit in rural parts of the US. I used to work as a field archaeologist, and we would run across odd things out in the middle of nowhere or up on top of a mountain or deep in a forest of swamp. Once, when doing high-altitude survey work in the mountains of Colorado, we were in the middle of an alpine forest. There were 3 of us, each with their own survey line to follow parallel to one another. Every 50 meters, we would dig a 50 centimeter by 50 centimeter hole and use our hand screen to screen the dirt. We would then record on a form the soil type, any artifacts, and so on. We would do this for miles and miles for 10 hours a day, the real life of an archaeologist. So, I was on the far right survey line, and we were climbing over boulders and through trees uphill toward the ridgeline. I dropped down off of a boulder into a small opening in the boulder field, and there was an old tree that had symbols carved in the bark that I could tell had been recarved repeatedly. There was a small but distinct stone circle that went around the base of the tree. There were what looked like Wiccan-type wooden figures made from small twigs twisted together in what looked like small wooden offering bowls with food and dark liquid in them. I called my survey partners over to the tree. We took photos and recorded it on a cultural site form, though it was modern. The site kinda gave me the willies since there were animal bones included in the shrine, or whatever it was. Lived 30 miles from the main road. Private land all the way to the house. Big panel windows all around the living room that looked over the property. We had no one near us, so privacy was constant. Up late watching monster truck rally with the living room lights on, no lights on outside. 2 men come up to the window and slap their hands on the glass and look right at me. I can hear them say to let them in and casually and slowly walk towards the front door connected to the living room. The door and connected frame was large and wide. When they walked behind the frame of the front door where I couldn't see them, I heard nothing. I walked to an angle where I would be able to see them and saw nothing. They weren't there or anywhere. It was like nothing happened, and I started to think that I imagined the whole thing. The slow walk and dead eyes were just so weird. In rural Washington, I was walking through some bushland on our property when I heard a sound like tearing paper, but very muffled and very quiet. I turned around and 3 trees behind me were straight up missing. While it was immediately explainable as soon as I walked over and saw a big old sinkhole, the fact that it was damn near silent to the point where I nearly didn't hear it still scares me. The sinkhole still on our property, and my uncle has put some ramps on either side of it as part of this homemade dirt bike track. This isn't scary per se, but I think it's the sort of thing everyone is looking for. So, I live in a patch of forest leading into Maine's Great North Woods. I walk my dog along the same winding trail almost every day. In all my years here, I've never seen another person out on the paths, ever. It's not a tourist spot, a camping spot, or a hunting spot. It's just one anonymous patch. I keep finding stuff though. A can of Pepsi, unopened from the 80s, a fold-up tent from Sweden, a backpack with nothing in it, toy cars, a bottle of wine, pieces of a car transmission, old cash, an unused notebook. I'll find these things on the path I walk randomly, in places they definitely weren't located the day before. I found that can of Pepsi on a log, the same log I have sat on a million times. There's one way in and one way out of those woods, unless you're climbing down cliffs, and why would you do that just to dump garbage on my land? When I was about 14, I lived with my grandparents in the country. I have 2 dogs. One is an English Mastiff, Jax, and the other is a mini Aussie Corgi, Blue. One night, I was just laying in my bed when suddenly my dog started going absolutely crazy and barking at something outside in the dark. I let them outside so they'd stop right when I opened the door, then they both just bolted into the dark. I yelled for them to come back inside for about 15 minutes, but they were gone. About 45 minutes later, I yelled for them again, and Blue comes out of the dark in the same direction they had went before. I called for Jax a little longer, and eventually he came inside. I went back to my bed, but there was something very off about Jax. He walked into the doorway of my room and just stood there, growling very quietly. I didn't really know what the deal was, so I walked over to him, and once I got about 2 feet from him, he suddenly started growling viciously, and he has never growled at me like this before. I got a little scared and went back to my bed, but he just stared at me for a while before eventually going back into the living room. For the rest of the night, I couldn't even get close to him without him growling at me. I don't know what was wrong with him, but it was definitely not normal.